coming back into my body. I was again coming in from outer space as a projectile. Is the strangest thing, and I had to re-enter that Earth's atmosphere at a certain angle, just like an Apollo mission coming back from the moon. And I messed up 3 times. And I remember skipping off the atmosphere and tumbling and yelling down to Melanie that, I got the angle wrong. Let me try that again. I'd have to do another orbit. And finally got the trajectory just right for re-entry. And then bam, landed on the bed.
Welcome to Psychedelic Diaries. I'm Ray Christian, and this episode will cure what ails you. We'll discuss psychedelic surprises, the beauty of mystery, and of course, experiences on high doses of psychedelics. Thomas Heath from Fortress Resort will be here momentarily for a deep dive and a soul search. But first, as usual, let's kick things off with a nugget and a noodle. In today's news nugget, Colorado rocking the boat. There are not one but 2 separate measures for statewide legalization of psychedelics. Activists have the required signatures and full legalization is now in play. Stay tuned on this one. And as for the noodle, something I've been noodling on of late, the beauty of psychedelic uncertainty. The Renaissance has incited a wide-scale effort to do a Matt Damon and Mars style science the shit out of this. While the pursuit of knowledge is noble, the psychedelic experience has inherent mystery. The Heisenberg uncertainty principle shows we can't know exact position and velocity at the same time. And the deeper we go into psychedelics, the more we see some other aspect getting fuzzy, like a game of whack-a-mole. For instance, the more we study the neural circuitry during a trip, the more we miss out on the subjective experience. It also seems impossible to figure out the perfect dose, trip frequency, or pre-journey ritual. And for those that have danced with the madness on a large trip, myself included, you know that the experience is not only unprovable, it can be tough to even put into words. Now, Mark Twain said, "When we remember we are all mad, the mysteries disappear and life stands explained." So maybe the uncertainty is the solution, and that it's better to forever surf the asymptote. And perhaps that's the point of psychedelics. A reminder of the beauty of the process. Something to noodle on. Our next guest is the founder and CEO of Fortress Resort, the Rock Beverage line, and a MAPS volunteer, Thomas Heath. Welcome to the show.
Good morning. Thanks for having me on.
Glad to have you. So Thomas, let's dive right in. We had a fun time a couple months back. You and I were cat skiing at your stunning resort outside of Calgary, Fortress Mountain. And I'm curious, what have the mountains taught you?
Geez. Humbling for sure. I mean, there's 2 different experiences in the mountains, isn't there? There's the one that you go into for recreation, and there's the other side of the mountains that you go to for recreation. And like psychedelics and like mountains, feeling insignificant is extremely good for a bloated human ego. So I would say there's 2 angles to the mountains: recreation and recreation, and of course, not messing it up. So I see myself just simply as a custodian of this magnificent place, and not the owner of it or anything as egoic as that. I'm simply here at a moment in time in these mountains that have been here for 65 million years. And are we allowed to swear on this show?
Yes.
Oh, so the trick is to unfuck it and then not fuck it up, quite frankly, in a nutshell. So in so doing, I've managed to put together a dream team of professionals that really make the place shine and treat the guests like family. And it's just been a great experience. Mm-hmm.
I love this concept of being reminded of how insignificant we are. And yet, when you're out on the mountain, there's this like surreal, subjective experience that feels like, no, this is the only thing that matters. And I remember commenting to one of the guys alongside that SciGen trip that we were there for, as I saw you skiing, that it just looks different. Like we can snowboard, the regular person can snowboard and ski. And then there's someone like you that's out there and it looks the perfection of it. It's like a physics experiment where it reminds me of like Federer's serve. It just looks different. Like that is the way it's supposed to be done. And I'm curious for you, you know, what does it feel like for you as an expert that gets out there on the regular basis? Like, what is that experience like for you? Even as the owner of the resort, you still enjoy it. So what does it mean to you to get out there so often?
Well, that's a really good question. And I think it's an overused term in today's lexicon, but this so-called flow state
Mm.
is I don't know if you're like me, but the monkey mind that never shuts up, a constant internal chatter. One way to make it go quiet is the journeys that we'll talk about. And the second one is the journey from the top to the bottom. And in inverse, the journey from the bottom to the top in psychedelic parlance. But it really does quiet the mind. And like you say, with physics, if I do happen to have a guest that isn't really comfortable in the powder, just some simple tricks, like it's like jumping on a bed when you were a kid and just pivoting your feet. When you're in the air, just pivot your feet. And speed is your friend. Now, I'm not talking amphetamines, but some speed to get up on top. And you're a water guy because you live in California, but it's the same as in water skiing. If you're trying to turn your water skis when you're not on top of the water, it's immensely difficult. But once you're on top, again, there's probably a psychedelic comparison to that. Once you're on top and you can, there's some mobility. And once you get the trick of that, it's really just like jumping on a bed when you're a kid.
I remember looking at you and thinking like, Thomas looks like a human butter knife cutting through the snow in the perfect arrangement. And it was just a thing of beauty. And as I dug into your background, it made more sense because I've seen now that you are a Renaissance man, Thomas. You've been a pilot, ski bum, owner of a mountain, time in oil and gas. You sold a company, owner of a beverage company, which is delicious. I've had it. And of course, an outspoken psychonaut. And I'm curious, as you look back on the colorful tapestry of your career, what patterns do you see?
Well, it sounds like we're using a lot of ski analogies today, I suppose, but in any of these things, so just to back up, I came out from just out of high school, working in a bike shop when mountain bikes were brand new, before there was any regulations on mountain biking whatsoever. So really, that was a fantastic time to take up that sport. And then into the mountains, just as snowboarding came out, snowboarding was still illegal. A lot of things that were formerly illegal are now re-legalized or still illegal, I suppose. But snowboarding was a fantastic adventure. This is in the days when there was no edges on snowboards, totally illegal at a ski resort. Really got addicted to sliding on snow, regardless of what the device was under my feet. But there's just that freedom. And then from there went into aviation, started a flying school when I was 23. Prior to, I was the youngest instructor at Mount Royal College in Calgary here in the aviation department. So everything's been sort of on an accelerated rush. Went into the air show business for Esso Petroleum. I think you guys still have Essos down there in the States, which was another fantastic adventure. Frankly, hard on the liver. It was a lot of going from city to city, having to. I don't know if you remember Slurms McKenzie from Futurama, but it was that slug that had to drink all the time professionally. It was sort of like that. Great fun, and then ended up in Czech Republic. Ended up as a subcontractor for Lockheed Martin so it gives me a little bit of. And this was back in 2002, 2003, when we'll call it the coalition of the bribed was going back into Iraq for the redo of the Iraq war, and saw firsthand how the arms business works. Didn't feel great about that. Have some different opinions on what's going on in Eastern Europe right now based on that experience and dealing with the rank and file in other NATO countries. And we won't get into the politics of it. I came back, got into oil and gas, and then during my oil and gas experience, before we sold, my partners and I sold to a big competitor, heard that Fortress was for sale, and just jumped on it. So to answer your question, it's been The planning, I would say, is a 1 out of 10. The execution has been sort of 8 or 9 out of 10. But in any event, you and I know how life throws curves, and making plans only sort of like that Above and Beyond song, that ballad that they did a few years ago, making plans. Um, it's almost a fool's game in this day and age. I try to inculcate that with my kids too, is like keep an open mind, pounce on opportunities as they come by, even if they weren't part of the so-called plan. And so it's been, I don't know if you'd call it a career. I would call it, I don't know, I don't have the right adjective for it, but it's been an adventure. We'll call it an adventure. And ultimately, you know, where this leads with the psychedelics, we'll get into it a little bit later on, but it's been an adventure.
It sounds like it. And I have two quick follow-ups for you. One, so I tried to sell a company and failed. And I saw what a fraternity that is and what a meat grinder that is if you pull it off. What's one takeaway from when you sold your company?
The more people involved in the sale, the more complicated it is. So we were, I can't get into all the details of it, but if you have, let's say, theoretically 4 partners and 3 of them are all on the same wavelength and one of them isn't, makes the disposition of a company infinitely more difficult, especially when the market conditions are favorable for a sale. So yeah, it's capitalism is a blast, isn't
it? Too many cooks in the kitchen, perhaps. I like that. That's a good takeaway. Keep it simple. Okay, the second little follow-up I got to ask. How many times in a month do you say, oh my God, I own a fucking mountain?
Well, you know, I think we're at about 35 shareholders of various levels. My wife and I still have control. I don't know if control is a good thing or a bad thing. And I don't see myself as an owner of the mountain. I see myself as the principal of the company, but that mountain is going to be here for a very long time. And it's kind of humbling, and most people wouldn't see it this way, but when you're witnessing an avalanche, or in the springtime these beautiful waterfalls, what you're actually witnessing is the destruction of the mountain. Slowly, gravity is winning, and in a few million years it'll be like the Appalachia, which used to be the highest mountains in the world, and now they're just lumps. So it's humbling, but you're witnessing the self-destruction via gravity of these mountains. So you want to, every rock that comes off a cliff face is part of its own self-destruction. So I know that sounds fatalistic. It's not. It's like, again, it's about seizing that moment and enjoying it for what it is, even though you're witnessing it self-destruct. Yeah.
So speaking of, we'll transition to psychedelics a little bit. And speaking of which, don't hate me, but I was microdosing LSD when I was on your mountain, and it started to first hit, didn't do a lot, but a little bit started to hit. And right as it started to hit, your amazing crew said, okay, guys, it's time to start preparing for the avalanche prep. And here's your beacons, and here's all the stuff in case there's a avalanche and you're out in the mountains. And I'm like, oh my God, what did I get myself into? And psychedelic experience, being able to talk about it freely is it's a little bit scary, because there's ain't no going back when you come out of the psychedelic closet. And I'm curious for you, what was your thought process, Thomas, as you decided to start working with maps, and notably to talk about your experiences?
Yeah, so this, as a pilot and very psychedelically naive, we really didn't get a grasp of this until 2014, and it came by way of our babysitter. So my wife passed away in 2012 from breast cancer, and I'd begun seeing my date at the time in 2014, and her family history is a horror show. I won't get into the details, but every kind of abuse and trauma you can possibly imagine. And our babysitter, who I'm good friends with, and good friends with her parents, and still am, even though we've moved, slid a little bit of tinfoil across the counter as we were paying her at midnight. And she said, you know, I think this would really help your girlfriend. And I said, well, what is it? And she goes, it's MDMA. And I said, okay, well, what's that? What's MDMA? And she goes, on the street, it's called ecstasy. And I recoiled and I said, get that out of the house. That's an illegal drug. You can't do that. And she goes, stop reading the news and read some journals, read some of the phase 1 clinical trials. This is, Rick at MAPS was a fair way along, I think, into phase 1 anyway. So I took the advice, did the background research on it as best I could as a non-scientist. But it seemed like in humans, it's well tolerated and efficacious. So we took a dive, and quite frankly, afterwards, I found out you're not supposed to make any big life-changing decisions for weeks afterwards. I didn't heed that advice. I asked my girlfriend to marry me that night on the first time we'd ever tried it, which it was the I've never experienced that level of mental acuity and clarity. I was after my wife died, I was liking beer a little bit too much, you could say, and never to an abusive level, but just almost, always had a beer in my hand, not a drunk by any means, but it was just a sort of a constant presence. And what I learned was my headlights were getting progressively dimmer, the headlights in my mind, and the headlights just came on high beam, and I could see that I was going to be driving off a cliff here fairly shortly. And that was extremely valuable. The next day, we were on a cruise ship, by the way. So my now fiance ordered a bucket of 5 beers brought to the room, which was sort of we're on vacation, so that's fine. And I had one sip of it, and it tasted like battery acid. And I didn't have a sip of beer for 6 months after that experience.
Wow.
It just physically changed the way I perceived the taste of beer or any alcohol. So my relationship is fundamentally different with my favorite beverage. We're still friends, but not to the extent, more of a mindful relationship with Mr. Beer.
Beautifully put.
That launched off a cascade of events. My wife, so she grew up as a Jehovah's Witness, so very much a cult, very much inculcated with certain ways of perceiving the world and whatnot. That's completely changed her perception of the world and her relationships. And almost in an evangelical way, wanted to get involved with MAPS, so much so that we were sort of teetering on the fence. Should we come right out and evangelize this medicine, or should we just keep it to ourselves? And I suppose an analogy would be if you discovered the cure for cancer, you wouldn't keep it to yourself. And this mind healing medicine was impacted her so greatly, and she was able to go back into those early life traumas, or as she calls it, the unexperienced experiences, re-experience them without any bitterness or hate, with just pure forgiveness. And so at our wedding, we certainly don't need any material goods. So we said, we don't want any gifts, but if you want to make a donation to help people with PTSD, donations are welcome. And we just didn't name the charity, that's all. And of course, the charity was MAPS Canada. I don't know what it was, 12 grand or something like that. And Mark Hayden, who was chairman of MAPS Canada at the time, thought this was a great idea. We got along great right off the bat. And I thought, I'm kind of a square guy. I'm a quote unquote normie. Maybe there's something I can do to help. So my role as a volunteer with MAPS is really working with the normies, with law enforcement, military, even some government officials that are ex-military. But I think what's really been the most rewarding part of this is a clinical psychologist, for one example, who has all the alphabet soup of CBT and DBT and all of the well-known therapies, latched onto this. And she, I think, integrative science, is that right? The college I forget the name of the institution down in California, but she'll be a fully certified psychedelic therapist on top of being a PhD clinical psychologist this fall. And her reaction when we started talking about MDMA specifically was very telling. And I think it parlays straight across the board in all pharmaceuticals. But she goes, why the hell don't I know anything about this? And then she corrected herself and said, "Oh, I know why, because our, the syllabus is basically written by big pharma." And she just said, there's so much arcane knowledge that's beneficial that we're just not allowed to talk about. So she took it by the horns. That's a great example. And a second one is a friend of ours, dear friend, who went over to Gabon and did the full Iboga course with the Bwiti people, and now she's doing all sorts of work with Iboga, not ibogaine, but Iboga. I'm not an expert on Iboga. I think it's the full plant, or I forget what the difference is. So there's two good examples, and then just being around as a resource for people that have questions about it. But MAPS is just such a great organization. They've managed to bring in people from all walks of life, all ages, and have a good sober discussion about the pros and cons. So I'm a big fan, as is Danny. If you ask me who my favorite guy in psychedelics is, it would probably be Rick Doblin too. So same answer. But yeah, it's been a very interesting journey.
Danny Motika, Peter Vanderheiden, a couple of my favorites, just trailblazers in the space. But for those two guys, you and I wouldn't have met. So I'm very thankful. And speaking of that, I'm thankful for just what you're doing. Thank you for being a voice for the quote unquote normies. I think it's great that we have a lot of attention for mental health and PTSD, and we need that. And it's good to triage, obviously. And yet there's a lot of people that are just kind of healthy, but dissatisfied. And these medicines help find meaning, find purpose, and get you from baseline to optimization, as opposed to just getting to baseline. And it takes people like you being outspoken. So thank you for doing what you're doing. And speaking of this whole process of coming out and talking about it and being bold about something that at the end of the day still is illegal, Thomas, I'm curious for you, what's one hard-earned lesson from your time supporting the psychedelic movement?
Well, yeah, as sort of a word guy, when we talk about legalization, illegalization, with these ancient medicines, be them ergomines or ergotamines or tryptamines, I tend to, because they've been legal for thousands of years, and only the most recent last century they've been considered illegal. I see it as a re-legalization process. And then aside from that, do we really need someone to tell us? So when Melanie went through her MDMA experiences, and she also did it with an underground therapist afterwards in a more contextualized environment, the term she came up with was illegally healed. And I thought that was pretty telling. Why should society care if you're legally healed or illegally healed? And I guess this sort of goes back to the early days of psychedelic research at the Weyburn Mental Hospital in Saskatchewan, where the term psychedelic was coined by Humphrey Osmond, when he was in discussions. I don't know if you know the story, but he was a pen pal and a frequent visitor to California with Aldous Huxley. And they were trying to come up with a better name than psychomomimetic for these medicines. And the term came out of a nice little rhyme, which was to fathom hell or soar angelic, take a pinch of psychedelic. And, again, these things have been legal for so long. And if people want to get better, regardless, is it running 10K a day? Is it seeking underground therapy? Your path to healing is uniquely your own. And I find this constant back and forth, because whenever we mix politics and science, we end up with politics, mixed with corruption, mixed with censorship, mixed with, the basic human frailties. So I'm sort of an anarchist when it comes to these medicines in that regard, that find someone you trust, do your homework, and get better.
Thomas, I think it's a good time to take a stab at the ineffable. I'll share one experience that I had on a high dose, and I'll kick it to you. So I had a recent experience 2 weeks ago on 9 grams of magic mushrooms, and my biggest trip ever. by far. And it was as if I got a museum tour of what I've done in the last few years and the sacrifices I've made, some of the thoughtfulness and some of the challenges that I've overcome. It kind of felt like my grandfather, like I was 9 years old again. My grandfather said, "Come here, son, let's go look at what you've done." And it's been a tough few years. A lot of sacrifices. As I mentioned, I tried to sell that company, was unsuccessful. And it just felt like getting this big slap on the back, a big attaboy, and the sensation of all the stuff you do that you think no one sees. No, someone sees it, or something sees it and notices it. And it was just meaningful in a way that's difficult to describe. I'm still kind of grappling with it. And I've never had anything quite like that. And I'm curious for you, Thomas, what is a mystical experience that still resonates?
So just to clarify, that was 2 or 3 weeks ago, right? So yeah, it takes time for that film to develop, doesn't it? It's sort of like a Polaroid. If you remember the old Polaroid cameras, as that develops, that picture comes in. So yeah, be easy on yourself. It doesn't happen all at once, does it? Yeah, it takes time. So your question is, what's mine? There's really two. When the lockdowns first started in March of 2020, my wife and I felt a side change, and her first response was, we have some ALD 52, which is a neat LSD analog. Again, that was also developed by Albert Hoffman. Not well studied, fairly similar, a little more introspection and a little less visuals, but more or less the same. She said, let's take some ALD 52, get out the whiteboard, and map out what the future is going to look like. And I was terrified. I thought, this is not a good idea. Like, something's going on here. Nobody really has a handle on it. This is when we didn't understand that SARS 2.0 was far less fatal than SARS 1.0, just more transmissible. But nobody knew. So turned out to be a great idea. And on the whiteboard the next morning was a term that came out of the experience, which was culture Jenga. So the Jenga game, Jenga. And I thought there's going to be some bad actors that just start pulling the blocks out of society, just to see how many blocks they can pull out before the proverbial tower comes down. I think we've witnessed that in a lot of ways over the last couple of years, testing what we have consensually agreed to as a society. So that's been interesting. And the second, I think that was the most profound. There was a whole lot of things I won't bother mentioning as well, but I think that was the most profound thing that came out of it. And now, and it wasn't a mystical experience. It was, again, just more clarity than anything else. In terms of mystical, we had relatively naive about the whole psychedelic situation, but we decided after reading Anne Shulgin and her encouragement to take a pinch of psychedelics when going to museums or art, be it art or ancient history, a little bit of psychedelic is always good in a museum setting, museum dose, if you will. So we had a business trip over to Europe. After we were done in Paris, we went over to Rome. We had a plan to hike about 30 kilometers of the Via Appia Antica, sort of as all roads lead to Rome. This was the first road that led directly into Rome by the Circus Maximus. Woke up at 6, ready to go, was groggy, kind of bitchy to my wife. She said, go have your antioxidants and your vitamins. So went, sat down on the bed, having my bagel, and I was watching some F-16s flying over the Shugash range on my laptop. And all of a sudden it just started to go. Everything started to wave out. And I said, Melanie, I've I don't feel well. And I was very naive with psychedelics at the time, so I did not know what was going on. And my wife thought I was having a sugar crash, so she went out to the grocery store and got the most magnificent peach. When she got back into the room, I was gone, and I was in this black ocean, wavy at night, horrendous. It was like a massive squall I found myself stuck in, with no life jacket, no boat, just there in this dark body of water with massive waves. And I swam over to this buoy that had a beacon on top of it, and I grabbed onto it for dear life. And was like, oh, I can't see land. I'm like, I have no idea what's going on. Thought I was losing my mind. And I opened my eyes and looked up, and the buoy with the beacon on it was Melanie, and I'm hanging onto her for dear life. And she said, you just started repeating this mantra, give in, surrender, give in, surrender. And as soon as I had repeated this 10 times, I just was rocketed out through space to, I know it sounds like a dream. And that's the problem with explaining one of these experiences to people, is it's recounting a dream, and it generally bores the hell out of people. But rocketed out to this blue light that was spinning at an insane rate of speed and getting these downloads. And I'm not a Buddhist. I don't know anything about Buddhism. As I found out after the fact, a lot of these messages were directly correlated to Buddhist teachings about attachments, about ego, and primarily you can't come back until you've given up your attachments. You can't come into this slipstream, this beautiful slipstream of blue light, until you've surrendered your ego and your attachments. I thought it was curious. I didn't understand what these messages meant at the time. And then what was interesting, and just to back up a little bit, this hotel room where it took place in Rome had touch sensitive walls. You could touch the walls and the lights would change. It was an unbelievable room to have this accident in. Chromotherapy, shower heads, with an Xbox controller, you could change the scent that was coming through the HVAC system, like from white tea to lavender, whatever scent you wanted. It was like the perfect trip pad, completely accidental. So coming back into my body, I was again coming in from outer space as a projectile. Is the strangest thing. And I had to re-enter that Earth's atmosphere at a certain angle, just like an Apollo mission coming back from the moon. And I messed up 3 times. And I remember skipping off the atmosphere and tumbling and yelling down to Melanie that, I got the angle wrong. Let me try that again. I'd have to do another orbit. And finally got the trajectory just right for re-entry. And then bam, landed on the bed. And immediately started dancing on the bed. Just like the powder skiing analogy I was telling you about before. We had some great French techno in the room, and it was just the most euphoric experience coming back from that. And Melanie said, I don't know what the hell is wrong with you today. Something is clearly off, but we're doing this 30K hike. So now I believe it was around 10 o'clock or 11 o'clock. And we went for it. She goes, I don't know what's wrong with you, but go get me some LSD. So I went back to my vitamin container to get her some LSD, opened up Wednesday, and it was empty. So I had packed 10 hits of LSD into a gel cap and buffed it up with magnesium, and unwittingly took it. And then I understood, but it took hours to find out what I did to myself. So I really had a lot of empathy for people with mental illnesses. And in hindsight, it was very much like Albert Hoffman's first go on Bicycle Day. I had no idea what I had done. I just thought I was losing my mind. So we did the 30K hike. I found a little bit of other material for my wife, namely Anne Shulgin's favorite 2CB. We had a little titch of that in the medicine chest, and we embarked on this walk on 1,000 micrograms. I was on 1,000 micrograms of LSD, and it was the most magnificent thing. The first place we went was the catacombs of Calixtus. So 500,000 people buried. And I thought, this is a really bad idea, honey. You're not going to take me into the catacombs. And I just bawled my eyes out it was so powerful being around all of these the Christians that spent their entire lives digging to give people in these vast networks of catacombs to give Christians a proper Christian burial. And just the weight of it was intense. Having Latin that had been worn off over 2,000 years of erosion coming out in 3D and being able to read it, being able to comprehend it, and ate and drank beer and hung out with, like, the further you get out of downtown Rome, the more authentic it becomes. So there's an Italian mother with a cigarette hanging out of her mouth, making you a calzone, doesn't speak a stitch of English, just entertained by whatever the hell is going on. We did the whole 30K, and it started out as the worst day of my life and ended up being the best. It was just so heart expanding, mind expanding. I haven't been back to that level of big dose, but that was the biggest by far. And it's tough. You know, I'm proud of you. It takes a lot of courage to do a big journey like you did. I honest to God, I don't know if I would have willingly taken 1,000 micrograms of LSD.
Well, I'm glad you did. I'm glad you did. What an experience.
Yeah.
That's an incredible recounting, and the whole story of it, the attempt to land back in the atmosphere, the being lost in this ocean, and actually this idea of, I like the way you described it, the slipstream of blue light. I called it was an ultralight beam of blue light, and that was on mushrooms on a different trip. I've only seen it once, and it's interesting to hear the commonalities. I've heard that with also near-death experiences. They've seen that. So, God, what a beautiful description. What a beautiful story. Thank you for sharing that, Thomas. Okay, we got to transition now to the speed round soul search. Okay, question number 1, Thomas. Who did you idolize as a child?
Geddy Lee from Rush.
Geddy Lee from Rush.
Yeah.
Okay, question number 2. Similar thought. You get 10 seconds with 10-year-old Thomas. What would you say to him?
Geez, I still am 10 years old. So I don't know exactly what I would say. It's like, hey, yeah, no, I don't feel a day older than 10. Really, I don't. Hopefully a little more wise, but definitely still a Zen mind, beginner mind, an expert of nothing, curious. Nothing's really changed.
Beginner's mind. Okay, question number 3. Thomas, what is the hardest part of high-dose psychedelic journeys?
The hardest, screwing up the courage to do it. 9 out of 10 times that we plan one of these things and have our mental landscape sorted out and our physical landscape sorted out, we pull the ejection handle and don't do it. That's the hardest part, is getting the courage to do it.
Jumping in. I'm with you on that. Okay, 4th and final question, Thomas. It's a Friday night. You've had a long week running your resort. You just want to unwind, and you got all the substances at your disposal. What is your ideal cocktail on a Friday night to unwind of mind-altering substances?
ALD 52. And then 4.5 hours later, 125 milligrams of MDMA, which has been a very long time. And then if there's enough left in the tank, you're going to be exhausted by the end of this anyway, but 2CB to finish it off. I think that's the Jedi flip.
So you and I have to hang out more often on a Friday night, clearly. Thomas, that was wonderful. Where can the viewers find you?
I try to keep a fairly low profile, but my LinkedIn profile tells the story unashamedly. We're ski resort you can find if you want to watch Inception, if you want to watch Planet of the Apes, if you want to watch Born Legacy, you can see the unbelievable beauty of the place. I'm missing a whole bunch of movies, but we're sort of Hollywood North. But yeah, and in the future we hope to have one of Rick Doblin's sort of babies up there, a Zendo, which we work at Burning Man in the past, and I see the value in that. And I think the world needs more Zendos, more meditation halls where like-minded people and normies can get together and share these experiences.
Oh, well put. Okay, Thomas, you were outstanding. Thank you so much for joining the show.
Thanks, Ray. And let's go skiing.
You don't have to twist my arm. Okay, well, go get some rock beverages and go visit the exquisite Fortress Resort outside of Calgary. I can attest it is a stunning experience. Our next guest will be Elia Thanhauser from North Spore. Join me at soiree.com and connect with other active, high-dose psychedelic explorers. Thank you for watching this episode of Psychedelic Diaries. I'm Ray Christian. See you next time.